Hi, I'm Scott,
Hi, I'm Mark.
and this is Church is Lame, the podcast where we try to make the church better by shining light on the inescapable black hole of Christian silliness. So, Mark, what's lame in the church this week?
Well, Relevant Magazine has offered us the gem Celebration is a Spiritual Discipline. This, of course, comes to us in complete void of this ever being mentioned in Scripture whatsoever. This article goes on about how important it is to practice joy and just to do this all the time and remembering all the things that God has done for us in the past. The sentence here, I think, really sums up the whole article. It says, we so easily get distracted and swallowed up by both the incidental and enormous challenges of life that we forget the many times God has dropped manna or parted the waters for us.
Yeah. Okay. So where do we even start with the so yeah. So there's this thing that is like an ice pick to my brain, where when I think about what church should be, a church should be a place where people can be authentic. And yet everywhere we look, every article we read, every sermon we hear tells us that God is on our side. So we shouldn't despair. We shouldn't have anger. We shouldn't have depression. We shouldn't have days of ambivalence or apathy. They're like every day we have to put on this show of joy and shiny happiness. And it's just mind-boggling how it's impossible to maintain. And B, well, and let's just talk about that. Like, how in the world do you maintain that level of a performance?
Well, I don't think that you can. I think that this article has an implicit understanding of that, where it's referring to joy as a discipline. You have to do this all the time. It takes a lot of work to maintain it.
Yeah.
Of course, this is, the Bible doesn't have any spiritual disciplines in it really other than, fasting and prayer. So going on about joy, right, which is listed as a fruit of the Spirit, is like, yeah, you'll certainly have joy coming from you,
right?
But not every moment in life is going to beget that feeling in us. Joy can be really overcome. It's like, don't think that, you could just walk up to somebody, who just lost a parent and say, oh, well, remember, apparently God dropped manna for you out of the sky. It's
right.
Like, you're a Jew. This is what God has done for you.
Yeah.
But I'm just being cynical about that,
Yeah. But isn't that like this? It's this is the root of like the kind of people, like when tragedy strikes a family, they'll say something like, oh, well, God must have done it for a reason. Like, for instance, somebody in the family dies or a baby in the family dies. Oh, well, there's one more angel up in heaven now. Right. And I think that this is kind of the root of that, right? Like, you always have to find a way to make the lemonade out of the lemon. And I think one of the things the Bible shows us over and over again is sometimes you just have to wade in a pool of lemons.
Right. You think of Psalm 69, you help me, O Lord, for the waters have come up around my neck,
Yeah.
My enemies surround me. Like, that is not a happy psalm and in the slightest,
Right.
And that kind of expression of agony, misery, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
That's important,
Yeah.
because, again, if we do not, if we don't be honest with ourselves about what we feel, then we get pulled in this silly trap, right? And this evangelical trap that says, they want you to be happy all the time because joy is a fruit of the Spirit. So if you have the Spirit, you should always have joy.
Yeah.
And of course, the answer is no. Sometimes you're just going to be really pissed at God,
right,
about what's going on in your life. Or have we forgotten, of course, Job? There's some stuff going on there.
Right.
And this this culture of happiness to say, if you're not happy enough, that clearly you don't have enough faith, and that's your problem.
Right. And how, what's the word I'm looking for? How insecure is a God that can't take his children shaking their fists at the sky in anger or just in expression, right? It's like, this is how I feel, and I can't direct it like at my 7-year-old daughter because she doesn't deserve it, right?
Right.
But don't we ultimately believe that the loving arms of Jesus and the the bigness of God is big enough to take that and say, well, yeah, I understand this is my child who is hurting, and I'm not gonna assign punishment for his hurting. Instead, I'm gonna appreciate the the transparency of the expression.
Right. What do the Beatitudes say? Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And it's not to say that you're blessed because you're mourning. You will be blessed with comfort at some point. So it's an important thing to have that, that to do that. You can't be blessed if you're not mourning.
Yeah.
How many people are out there right now, and how many times have either you or me, in our life in church, just kind of tried to hide some really bad stuff that was going on, so that people wouldn't tell us the same things. Well, you just need to pray more, you need to have more faith, or the platitudes.
Yeah.
It'll all work out in the end.
Right.
Which I love to say to people myself. Of course, I never tell them how it's going to work out, and I don't make any assumptions, but
yeah. Like when we look at the Bible, especially the Old Testament, like when I zoom out and look at the Bible from 30,000 feet, one of the things I see is a series of stories of how God's people are exiled, and exiled from society and exiled from God sometimes, and how they return. Right? There's always this going away and returning to God. And pastors are not afraid to talk about that from the pulpit. But what we never seem to talk about is how do you make it through the season of farness? When you don't feel joy and happiness, and when you don't feel that immediacy of relationship with God, and as much as you try to press in, you're not feeling back anything return. And that's not something we teach in the church much. So I'm wondering if you would have any ideas yourself of what do we do in those times? Like, what does it mean to pursue God when you can't do that shiny, happy thing?
Oh, that's a really good question, because sometimes, the only thing we can really do to pursue God is just to do it.
Yeah.
It's as dumb as that is, right? So it's the fake it until you make it kind of a thing. Because there's a certain blessing that can come in just keeping up, the practice of your faith,
Right.
even when you're not, because if you're not feeling it, you don't have to, feel it, right? It's like, to say that you need to feel it is a really ableist kind of perspective, right? Because if you're neurodivergent, you may have zero emotional reaction to this at all.
Yeah.
And you have to ride on, and you only ever ride on that intellectual reaction.
Right.
And that's where I am most of the time is I'm working with, the intellectual approach to my faith. I don't have strong emotional reactions to it. I have very low empathy overall, which is, something, people will be like, oh, you should have more compassion on people. It's like, I have compassion, I don't have empathy.
Right. Right.
It's not a thing I can just go to the store and buy. I can't just pray and get it and fix it. Whatever it is, it's going on upstairs, right? That's how I live. But for a lot of people, it's like, things have gotten so tough, and you're in that place where you just, even though you can feel it, you won't.
Yeah.
You have the capacity to do it, but you cannot do it because you're so hurt, you're so agonized, you're so lonely, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so I think that just that keeping up with it, keeping, going to church, reading Bible when you can, praying is, of course, is very important.
Yeah.
Just in terms of our interaction with God. But, more than that is also the community that comes along with it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Because if we are to bear one another's burdens in love, well, that's where the honesty comes in. If we share our burdens with each other, then, it's not all on us to
Right.
carry us through. It's on, you and me to carry each other through, and to carry, somebody else at church through, so it's like, it's by, if you remove yourself from that community,
Yeah.
then you've lost a major part of that support and that blessing, right? If you're mourning, you can be blessed by that community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to tack on to that, because that's what I was going to say is, like, we know, and we don't need a Bible or church to tell us this, that you can only have a limited number of really close relationships, of really like tier one, accountable, quality relationships.
Yes.
So knowing that, you cannot be your real authentic self among the entire church body, right? You cannot
no.
You cannot be your real authentic self among even maybe your home group, I would say. But you need to have 1, 2, 3 people in your life. 2, I would say, is a good number of people that you can really be the authentic you with at any time for any reason. Like, you need to have that relationship in your life. And for some people, that's not an easy thing to do. Like for me, like cultivating those relationships to me feels like an incredible energy suck, right?
Yeah.
But even though it feels like an energy suck, without those relationships, you will never feel like you can be the real you ever in any situation. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's if we had to ask the question, is church a safe place? The answer is almost certainly no. It's
not at all. Yeah, never.
If you walk into a church and somebody says, "How is your day going?" You're like, "Well, I thought I was doing good, but I've started drinking again, and it's starting to get bad, and I'm ashamed to talk about it." It's like, you will have that person back away from you in a real hurry.
Yeah.
It's like, when clearly you're crying out for help because you're trying to share with this person that you suffer from alcoholism, right? But they're going to leave you alone.
Yeah.
And that's terrible. Like, there are so many things I've done in my life that, I could not begin to confess to the body politic of my church.
Yeah.
It would freak people out, and they would not want to ever talk to me again.
Right.
So it's horrifying that church cannot be that safe place
right
for everybody. And the way I described it, it's like, I need people that I can drink, smoke, and cuss with, right?
Right.
The 3 evangelical sins, right?
Yeah. Right.
I need to have some, like, those people I can do that with. And that's a short list of people. But the list of people that I can really open up about, like, the true darkness inside, that's an even shorter list of people.
Right. Yep. So, just to wrap this up a little bit, we talked a little bit about the individual, what you can do as an individual. But let's talk about now the church. Let's talk about Christian leaders, professional Christians, pastors, people at the pulpit. We have no problem at the pulpit talking about the shiny, happy, joyful life. So what is it that we're not teaching that we need to teach more of to help the congregations understand what it is to just, like you said before, to just do it? Like, what is the thing that's not being taught at the pulpit, where so many people's light bulbs never go on? Like, oh, I don't have to put on this facade all the time.
Well, I think we need to be teaching lament as a spiritual discipline. as a practice, not just that it's acceptable, but that it's necessary.
Mm.
Constructive and productive ways to lament,
And just
having a
really quick,
mind.
let me just
Yeah.
interrupt you there. Can you, for I know in a lot of evangelical circles, that word is not used very much. So could you give us a definition, a working definition?
Yeah. Yeah. So just, yeah, I've never been asked that before because, I travel in church circles, right?
Mhm.
But lament, it's gonna be like just to have that deep expression of just existential suffering,
Mm.
you know. To to rue, I guess would be another fun word that nobody uses anymore.
Yeah.
It's like it can be it can be regrets, it can be shame, it can be just anything that we feel that we regard as like a negative emotion are things that we can communicate to
Yeah.
God, and that's to lament is to bring all of that out in the open.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I think in recent history, this new conversation about racism in America, there have been some churches and some denominations that have stepped up to the plate in terms of lament and
Mhm.
been willing to say publicly that racism exists and the church has been part of the problem. And even to some extent, some leaders have been willing to say that racism is baked in to the American church experience to something. So I think that's really good what you're saying about lament.
Yeah, and I think there's also, it's getting better, but there's still a cultural stigma, especially in conservative circles,
Yeah.
around mental health,
Yeah.
which is deeply problematic because if your leg is broken in three places, you go to a doctor and nobody complains.
Right.
But if your brain is broken in three different, nobody cares.
Right.
It's like it's that mentality of rugged individualism,
Mhm.
the masculinity ideal of conservatives, which tends to be a more stoic kind of approach. It's like, well, that's not really productive.
Right.
um and we need to get rid of that, and to make sure that if somebody needs help beyond just spiritual counseling or friendship, some people need to get therapy,
Yeah.
some people need to get medication. It's to be able to direct people to resources where they can get that help and not be ashamed to do it. And if they can't afford it, stepping up and providing that help, for each other,
Yeah.
congregation by congregation kind of a thing.
That's so good. That's good. All right. So I also had an article that I wanted to talk about this week. This one comes to us from people that I'm a big fan of. Charisma magazine.
Just the name says it all.
Yeah, charisma. What is that? That's charisma. What is that from? I'll find that and put that in the show notes. All right, so here's the headline. Trans Jeopardy contestant, a biological male, lauded as women with the highest overall earnings in the show's history. All right. And so this is Charisma Magazine, a Christian publication. And it's just so interesting the way this is worded, right? Jeopardy contestant, a biological male, lauded as woman with the highest overall earnings in the show's history.
Yeah,
So,
there's so much janky things going. I mean, I don't even know where to begin. I look
well,
forward to hearing your starting place for this.
so let's start here with the fact that the whole article is literally a 30-second read. Like it's one of these articles where each sentence is a paragraph and it's only 5 paragraphs long. It's literally the article quote unquote is 5 sentences, right? So first of
Right.
all, let's talk about the death of journalism, right?
Well, to that point, if you follow the links, this was printed or posted by Charisma
Yeah.
with permission from Faithwire,
Oh, gosh.
which is apparently owned by CBN. So,
Right. Oh,
that's its own special thing.
right. So when I think about the show that we're doing here, Church is Lame, I think about lameness not as being just as not cool, but I think about lameness as being broken. And so when I read this article, I ask myself the question, what's broken? And and so to me, the fundamental thing that's broken, that this article is just the latest example of, right, is the church's refusal to let go of the us versus them mentality. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
okay, we are Christians, we are God's people, we are pursuing holiness. Like you said, we don't gamble, we don't drink, we don't smoke. These are the things that define us. And if you're not one of us, we are never going to miss an opportunity to point it out. And we are never going to miss an opportunity to illustrate how angry and upset we are that the world is changing around us.
Right. And aside from the use of, biological male,
Right.
in that language in this article, you've already said trans.
Yeah.
You don't need to go on and use other words to say, well, this person was, born and assigned male on their birth certificate. Like, you just don't need to do that. But if you want a virtue signal to,
Yeah.
the other people in your camp, and, this is how you do it.
Right.
But, theologically, though, I guess I'll start there, right? Like,
Yeah.
We have, Paul, who wrote in 1 Corinthians 5:12 and 13, what business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? God will judge those outside. So yeah, why is this even an article being written by a Christian? Like, who honestly cares? I think that this trans woman herself even said that it shouldn't be a big deal. Let me say, yeah, this isn't something that should be interesting.
Right.
And I mean, I don't know if this trans woman is a Christian or not.
Yeah.
But she's got kind of the point. Like, this isn't something that should interest anybody. So if you're not affirming of trans individuals, then you shouldn't still care about this.
Right.
This is Jeopardy.
Yeah.
For crying out loud. It's a game show.
Right. Yeah. And that's like what you're talking about is my second beef. Like, church leaders, professional Christians, let's call Christian celebrities.
Mhm.
Don't you have better stuff to be talking about? Like, aren't you supposed to be preaching the gospel of Jesus? Aren't you supposed to be housing the homeless and feeding the hungry and clothing the naked? Like, aren't these the things? And like, while you're at it, those people who are sitting in your pews, if you want to make them feel better about themselves once a week, that's probably not a bad thing to do either.
Yeah. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves.
Yeah.
Do what it says. I love James. He's so angry, and I understand that.
Right. Yeah, but then, like, that's part of my beef. And then like my other, and I know I'm just kind of breezing through these, because that one's just kind of obvious. Like, so many pastors, like, how many pastors have now unapologetically just become political partisans in the last 4 years, right? And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but
no, that's a different article.
Just to say that pastors and Christian leaders spend so much time now grinding axes instead of discipling their flock.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, not to rabbit hole, but I mean, this is just kind of the natural outpouring of Christian nationalism at work.
Yeah.
It's you can only care about what happens on Jeopardy as a Christian. A non-Christian show aired on a non-Christian network whose entire point is just to make money.
Yeah.
And to make, so it's like, the only way you can care about this is if you feel that, you are entitled to have the entirety of the culture of your nation reflect your image of Christianity.
Right. Which is bizarre because it doesn't really reflect Jesus at all. right? So like once again, so when you zoom out from the Bible to a 30,000 foot view, like when you kind of go, well, who was Jesus hanging out with? Like he wasn't hanging out with the religious pure, you know, he was hanging out with the harlots, and he was hanging out with the tax collectors, and he was hanging out with all the people that religious leadership would kind of shake their disapproving finger at, you know?
Yeah, like if Jesus was hanging out with, tax collectors, which for, the Jews in Palestine at that time, or Israel, depending on how angry you are that I just said Palestine.
Yeah.
So, for them, you had like they were being not necessarily abused by Rome, but exploited by Rome.
Sure.
And this came on the heels of them having finally gotten the yoke of the Greeks off of them.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of bitterness toward any Jew who would ever dare to serve the empire by collecting taxes, not to mention that, there was at least a reputation, how well deserved, I don't know, that tax collectors would extort people for additional money. So they were hated, I don't even know like the best possible example in today's day and age. Maybe it's like, saying like a Chinese communist spy might kind of like get the point there. And prostitutes, it's like, well, which just with like the sexual ethic and of the Bible, and just like the purity culture of evangelicals in particular, right? Like, this trans contestant would be right there,
right,
with Jesus talking to her. It's the oh my.
Right. Like, so like when I particularly, my thoughts always come back to the woman who was about to be stoned, right? And Jesus comes up upon this situation, and of course sends the men away, and then goes to the woman and says, who's here to judge you now? And the answer is nobody. And he says, neither do I. But then at the end, I think at best you can think of I think of this as Jesus speaking a blessing over her, or at worst, Jesus is just giving her some good advice. Like, go sin no more.
Yeah, go on. Stop it.
Stop.
Just stop it.
This is a new chance, and tomorrow's a new day, and you have a new opportunity to make new choices, right? But what he didn't do was sit there and give her 15 minutes of, what for?
Right.
So what do we need? Once again, what do we need to do as what is the discipline as individuals that we can work into our lives to stop categorizing everything and every person we see as us or them?
Oh, yeah, that's a question that I don't know that I have a good answer for that.
Yeah.
Although Richard Rohr has written plenty on this particular subject. Fundamentally, we are given two commands that are above all other commands. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus says, the law and the prophets depend on these.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a thing to say. It's like the law and the prophets, whatever is in them had to have come out of these, and if you are focused on loving your neighbors yourself, you don't care if they're trans, they're hungry, you give them food.
Right.
If they're naked, you give them clothes. If they're thirsty, you give them water. And that's really all it is just have to focus on loving these people. Now, to be fair, if people don't agree, and as Christians, even about how to deal with things like LGBTQIA matters, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But you don't have to have an opinion on one side or the other of this particular, fence
Yeah.
in order just to love people. But once they come into the church, there has to be something there.
Right.
So if you are affirming, you don't care. If you're not affirming, then you're gonna be like, well, you need to. I mean, if you're trans, I don't know what you need to do exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
if you've gone through reassignment surgery, it's like you can't roll back, entropy there. It's happened.
Right. Yeah.
But at the same time, there's this tendency, I think, in for humans, right? Whatever is most obvious to us is what we want to go after first.
Sure.
And it's really difficult for people to say, well, you know what, I don't think you should be gay, but you're in church now. But I'm going to let the Spirit guide you on that one.
Yeah.
I'm going to let the Holy Spirit lead you, because you could be a complete and utter a-hole, right? And that's more important.
Right.
You could be so selfish and self-centered, that you would put even the worst sociopath to shame.
Right.
So it's like, what needs to be transformed first?
Yeah.
And there isn't a lot of reliance on the Holy Spirit for that.
Right. Yeah. So let me say this. We are human beings, and by nature, we tend to see ourselves in the most forgiving way possible. And we don't tend to look at others with that same forgiving lens that we see ourselves with. And that even extends into the way we study the Bible, right? We tend to do things like, well, I'm a Paul. I would never be a Judas, right? I like when the Bible talks about, oh, Israel, how far you've gotten from me. Well, that's not me, that's them. Like, it's even in the way we study the Bible, and we have to walk that back. And when we study the Bible, we need to realize it's always us. Like the law was written to illustrate to us that we can't keep the law. Like when the Bible talks about people who are far from God, that's us. And this is why all of us feel this inescapable something, that there's more to life than just waking up and going to work and paying our taxes and going to the racquetball court and coming home. Like, there's something more to life. And that's what that is that to me, that's the desire to connect with the divine, right? But we need to kind of be honest with ourselves that on this side of divine is a lot of personal garbage that needs to be dealt with. And when you start getting real about your own garbage, you can be a lot easier on others about their garbage.
Right. And the Bible, I mean, specifically the Old Testament is what I'm thinking of. There is a lot of, us, them language in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
It's like, Israel, you are my chosen people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm not faulting God for this. That's how God did it, and in a world that was just viciously, corrupted.
Yeah.
He grabbed his own chosen people to be, a source of light and a source of that message. And of course, ultimately that's realized in Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jesus is the light of the world. It goes to everybody. But while you could excuse an Old Testament Jew for thinking, hey, I am so much better than those Babylonians or those Sumerians or those people in Assyria, I can feel that way because I know that I'm God's chosen people.
Right.
But with this new covenant, there is no chosen people. It is all who might believe. It's like, for God so loved the world, that all who would believe in him, might be saved. So, there's a whole thing there. It's like, we are all in the same boat.
Yeah.
It's like, we're saved, right? So it's like being all haughty that, hey, I'm in the boat and you're not in the boat yet. You're such a jerk. It's like, come on,
Right. Yep.
And even if you have somebody that's like actively working against you and persecuting you and trying to destroy the gospel,
Yeah.
we're kind of told to love them anyway.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
It's like love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you.
Right.
Like, whoops, Jesus apparently didn't think we should have a way out.
Right. Okay. So let me ask you this then. So let's go to the other side then. We just talked about the personal side. Let's talk about church leaders and what happens behind the pulpit. So like you just said that this kind of us them mentality is as old as the Bible itself and is as old as Jewish thinking, which predates the Bible. So my question is, what is the drug about the us them paradigm that is so difficult to wean ourselves from?
Justification.
Yeah.
Is, at least in my opinion, I can't say that is, the answer. But we love to be justified. What do you think the beginning chapters of Genesis are about? The whole, fall. It's, they wanted to be like God, knowing good from evil. They wanted to be able to justify themselves.
Yeah.
We have Jesus railing against the Pharisees and teachers
Yeah.
for trying to justify themselves. It's like, you turn to the scriptures because you think by them you will be saved.
Yeah.
That's a damning statement to make, right? It's
Right.
like we want to justify ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so easy to do.
Yeah.
And the easiest way is to say you're not like me.
Right. Right. So I think one of the things that happens is, so let me preface this by saying it is 2022. We are starting a new year. It's January. It's the information age, and never before in the history of humankind has it been as easy to figure things out as it is in this day that we live in America, where you can just jump on a web browser and Google anything. And so America has finally figured out, like, look, I don't even need a high school education. I just need to go to a website, get a piece of paper that says I'm ordained, and I can open my doors and make money tax free, right? And so I think, and I'm going to catch a lot of flack for this, and I've made my peace with it, that to the weak-minded pastor, not to the weak-minded flock, but to the weak-minded pastor, the us them paradigm is low-hanging fruit. It's easy, right? You never have to like really get good at theology and doctrine. Certainly not good enough where other people who are experts in theology and doctrine would say that you're good at theology and doctrine, right?
Right.
So it's this super low-hanging fruit where, like, and this happens at churches all the time, like, don't be like Eve, be like Adam, right? But like, nobody actually teaches like the subtlety that, like, wait a minute, like Adam wasn't way off when Eve decided, when this process went through, he was right there. And like they were in this, even though they may not have illustrated so clearly as being co-conspirators, like it wasn't like the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing, right? But it's easy, and we can get our congregation to go, yeah, that's right, just by casting one person as us and one person as them.
Right. And there's it kind of turning to the pulpit, with that wagging finger.
Yeah.
There's, it's just a reality that it is easier for us to believe narratives than it is for us to believe facts. If you give somebody a good narrative, it doesn't matter how much fact you provide that contradicts that narrative, people are going to like that narrative. And I think that the reason has to do with just like the average, literacy level among, humans, right? It's not super high. When you look at like how many people out there actually get master's or doctoral degrees, or in the case like my brother, multiple doctorates,
right?
It's a very tiny amount of the population. So for, people in those categories, right, you're used to really drilling into the facts of a thing, right?
Yeah.
But for your average person, things need to make sense.
Yeah.
Narratives make sense of the world.
Right.
Narratives can take facts, right, or alternative facts, and weave them together in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
And once you have made sense of it,
Yeah.
you resist unmaking that sense.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
It's so it just, I mean, look at it in terms of, if somebody came to you and said, no, the world's flat, and I can tell you that the world's flat because of this, this, and this, you're gonna be like, no, because you already have that sense of understanding of things, right? You resist it.
Yeah.
And I think that when you look at the pulpit, the narratives that we tell from the pulpit are deeply important. Our pastors need to be giving narratives that aren't violating scripture, but B, are unambiguous in themselves.
Yeah.
And those narratives need to be, the source of prayer, not the source of, or need to come from a source of prayer, not from a source of ego or pride or hurt. And I'm not saying that's easy.
Yeah. Yep. So us and them, stop it. Just stop it.
Yeah. And I guess just one last point about that, right? Is that,
okay.
Us and them, it also manifests in the language that we use.
Yeah.
And so for us as individuals, like that's something we need to be paying attention to, is how we refer to, other people, like this trans Jeopardy contestant, a biological male, like that's othering language. It's
exactly right. Yep. And that was the point of the language, was to other them.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what we think is lame in the church this week. If you see something lame in the church, shoot us an email at churcheslamepodcast@gmail.com. Okay, so one of the things we want to do at the end of every episode is give our recommendations, things that we've found, that we've read, that we've enjoyed, that has added something to our lives that we'd like to share with the world. So, Mark, what's your recommendation for the week?
So my recommendation is going to be an album from the band Anti-Flag. It's, they were a little bit more hardcore punk in their younger days. Nowadays, they're a little bit more pop punk kind of a thing. But the recent album, 2020 Vision, is outstanding in my opinion. It is, a punk album, so you know what you're getting into. But the song on their Christian Nationalist, it's been on my head in almost constant replay.
Nice.
Yeah. So what about you?
So I'm a self-professed TikTok junkie. I'm one of the ones who will sit there and scroll through TikTok for an hour at a time. There's a user on TikTok, McClellan, MAKLELAN, and his lane of expertise is biblical translation. That is his day job, right? So he lives in this world of biblical translation. And instead of calling balls and strikes about like how the Bible is right or true or not true or those kind of things, instead he's really got this gift for explaining the Bible and what sourced into it to kind of come up with what we have now as the modern Bible, right? And he's really gifted without being arrogant or once again, us and them and people. And as well as, in TikTok, where you have these super short video formats, as well as being engaging and informative and entertaining as well. So his username is McClellan, MAKLELAN. And I highly recommend, if you're on TikTok and you're interested in the things that we're talking about, check him out.
Excellent. So thanks again for joining us. We just love to have you here. We hope that you'll come back. And with that, may the Lord send his Holy Spirit upon you. May he fill you with wisdom. May he fill you with love. May you be a blessing just as he has blessed you. In the name of Jesus, amen.